Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're in Colorado and we only have so much time, so I'm not going to spend the entire podcast episode introducing our runner. Let's say in the 1970s, from that era, there are a few names that any sports fan in North America knows associated with track and road racing. We have Free, Shorter, Rogers, and anyone who actually ran, anyone who's involved in the sport knows the name Benji Durden. Not only was he part of one of the greatest eras of U.S. distance running, he helped define it. The list is long. I'm just going to mention a few highlights. World record holder on the podium at Boston Marathon, world championship team, U.S. competed in Russia, set a world record in the 24-hour relay. Fortunately, Benji has done a lot of writing, and you can read up some of his first-person accounts of some of these adventures. And we'll talk today on just some of the stories with our guest, Benji Durden. Hi, Benji.
Well, good morning.
In part one, we talked with Benji about a lot of his successes and the earliest parts of his career. We'll go into the end of his career and the running he has done since he retired from professional running. Enjoy. Let's talk about some of the less happy parts of this, looking at the next Olympic trials and when you did get a severe injury that kind of disrupted things.
That Boston started it. Because of that blister, it was on right behind the big toe, and it was about a 2-inch blood blister. So the ball on the inside of the foot, I didn't want to land on it. So I started rotating out to the side of the foot, and that strained my plantar fascia. And I didn't know that was what was wrong, really. And I went to the World Championships, and there was a Finnish massage therapist that worked with Salazar. And I thought maybe it was a heel pointer. That's what he said, it was a heel pointer. And he went in and dug in really deep, and he made it even worse. So I ran okay at the World Championships up until about, I want to say it was about 20 miles, 22 miles, somewhere in there. Actually, it wasn't that far. Maybe it was just before 30K. We had an aid station collision, and I went down. And I reached across each other. We went down. That's when the surge for the finish started. And by the time I got up, it was like 200 meters and going away. I chased them for about a mile and a half and then went into finish mode. So I didn't have a good race.
Yeah. That was Helsinki?
That was Helsinki.
Yeah.
I was 220 and change. And then I was committed to run the Toronto Marathon. So I went there and I was the favorite, primarily because my PR was well ahead of everybody else's. And they sat on me. And so it was a windy day and everybody just kind of lined up behind me. So I just ran 2:18 pace for a while. And then it got progressively faster, but then in 5K to go, I really took off. I ran low 14s. That's 14:10 to 14:15, somewhere in there. And over the last mile, I didn't know where anybody was. So I really wanted to put it away. And about, I guess, 600 meters in that last mile, somebody stuck an ice pick into my foot.
Did you have a bone spur? Did you actually have a
plantar fasciitis?
That can cause a bone spur.
Now, yeah, it makes you feel like that, but it was plantar fasciitis, and it went from plantar fasciitis to actual tear. And I was right at 420 for that last mile and tore the plantar, and I never ran fast again. That was a 2:15 run the hard way because it was slow and then come in hard. I never broke 2:18 again.
But that didn't stop you from running.
No,
It didn't stop you from winning. Yeah.
I kept thinking I would come back. I won again, but it was several years later. I won a couple of marathons in my later part of life. And they're small marathons, obviously, and they're not fast fields, but I did do them. And actually, I have the record for the longest duration between my first win and my latest win. And it's probably my last win.
44
and change.
Yeah.
1977 to 2017. Was that right? Yeah. Was it 2000? Hey, so it's 40 years and some change. I can look it
Yeah.
up if you want. Yeah,
It's tough. Mhm.
but yeah, and a lot of the guys that were close to me are no longer running. So it's possibly a record that'll stand. Although Yuki from Japan may get it.
Yeah. At a marathon, that's pretty amazing because how many people are still standing competitive at the distance? Yeah. Thinking about this, I was like, wait a minute, I won a half mile in 1977 and I won the Ontario Masters in 2019. I got 42, but it's only a half mile. I'm sure there's plenty of people
As
running.
well as
You're on the
you're
100 meters.
I won the whole race.
I want to talk about the other kind of the marathon accomplishment list that you did with you and Amy in the 50 states. Where did that, when did that become, hey, that's something we should do? And whose idea was it? And how long did it take to plan and work that out?
I'd been coaching a woman, Judy Henderson, and I did a period where I coached. I'm not really doing that anymore, but I did a period where part of the way I made a living was coaching. I was doing computer support and coaching. That was my contribution to the household. And Amy was working various engineering jobs. She's a telecom engineer. I was coaching her, and I was helping her get marathons. I was coaching her for marathons. And she mentioned mostly to Amy. She mentioned it to me, but she was friends with Amy too, about this 50 states thing. And I had another friend, I wasn't coaching him, I'm advising him some. And he said, there's this 50 sub 4 marathons. And up at that point, I was still running in the 330s or better. And I thought, yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I can do that. Amy wanted to break, what she could do, but she didn't have a time goal as much. She wanted to run all 50 states. And I wanted to run all 50 states. We also wanted to run DC, and I wanted to be under 4 hours for all of them. I didn't think it was going to be that challenging. It turned out to be a little more challenging than I thought.
How many states do you think you had when you said, okay, I'm going to do this?
I want to say I was around 20 because I've ran a lot of different races. It might have only been 15 to 20, but Amy didn't have anywhere near that. And because she hadn't been running marathons as long, you had a fair number. She might have been 20. Anyway, we started out, and Amy did a lot of the planning, and we did things like 19 marathons in a year to get there. And we had a timing business. We were doing this while we were timing races. We had a sprinter van. So after we would finish timing a race, we'd empty all the junk out and put a small futon in the back, roll up futon, and so we could sleep on it. We'd drive across the country to run a race and try to get 2 or 3 as we did that. And we ran all over the United States. And it was a challenge, but it also was an interesting challenge. And we enjoyed the experience. But like I say, towards the end, it was getting harder and harder to break 4.
What was the logistics of your timing company? How big of races could you handle? What technology and what were you using?
Like we started off, and it was my first timing experiences were back I was in grad school at the University of Georgia. And we started the Athens Track Club, and we put on small races, and we made our own ribbons, and we handed out popsicle sticks, and we had an old Chronomix, one of the thermal printers, and we matched everything up, and I felt like we knew what we were doing. And I guess we did because the races worked. So when we started, it was similar to that, although we had pull tags where you'd have a tag at the bottom of a bib, and we'd tear that off and put it on a spindle. Now, part of the reason we got going into this is the Bank of Boulder, which put on Boulder, wanted to do a cross-country meet. And the way they were doing the Boulder timing, they were using basically interpolated performances. Every 5 seconds or so, they would give you a card, and that card would have a time on it. And they would interpolate between the 2 cards where you were. I think they had 15 shoots. And the shoots were just all combined at the end. And it'd be several days before they really knew what the results were. And all the shoots were open. It was just open shoots. You just went down to shoot, and they would pull off those cards as well as they'd have a pull tag, and they would relate everything. And she was then asked to find a way of timing a race like a cross country meet. And so she did research and discovered Run Score, which was Alan Jones's contribution to it. And he initially did it off of a small mini computer. And then he eventually figured out how to do it for PC. We had back in those days, it was a full-size PC. We didn't have notebooks. So when we started, we were doing it like at a school gym and taking the results back. And we did 3 races or so. And then people started asking, can you do it for us? And it began to snowball. And I think we were doing 10 or 15. Amy probably could give you better numbers. We're doing like maybe 10 races a year, not a lot. And then 9/11 happened. And just before 9/11 happened, she got laid off from her company. But she had 14 weeks paid. And so I began doing less computer support. I was still doing some, but less. And she now had full-time race timing. And so we went from whatever we were doing to pretty much soliciting races. And we actually were able to buy a couple of laptops. We had one laptop, one of the first good ones we got had 25 gig hard drive.
Oh, yeah.
And more timing with race score. And race score, Alan Jones had decided, okay, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And a friend, Alan Avery, decided to do ELF score, which was essentially a run score with a lot of bells and whistles. And we became his alpha and beta testers. So that we went down that path. But we got to where we handled Race for the Cure a few years, where we were doing flood shoots, and we had time machines, which is a little timing device. And we would check and make sure we fixed the errors and got people fixed with pass each other in shoots. And it was, I don't know how we survived, but we did it. And that was what we did until COVID hit. Eventually got chips. Chips began to show up. Initially, people were talking about championship. The problem is for championship is they were expensive. If you lost one, it cost you a lot of money. And we weren't charging that much for our timing services. We couldn't really afford it. And then other companies started coming in, and we did the nationals. I want to say it was 2000. When was the first nationals, Amy? Our first national cross country. I think it was 07. And IPECO had some chips. They were just getting started. They weren't really commercially ready yet, but they wanted to time the meet. So we let them do their thing and we did our thing. And we had our results and they were done and accurate before the IPECO chip came in. So we weren't impressed. But we got the nationals again. This is here in Boulder for 2014 and 15. And I'd also, by that point, it's already got an IPECO system because it got better. And we were timing cross-country meets, and I got the IPECO system as well as a Finish Links camera to fix problems, because they talk about how accurate chips are. They're not as accurate as people say. They're like within 0.2 of a second. If you get 2 people finishing in that same time frame, you don't know who beat who, depending on where the foot was, etc. We had a good bit of money invested in all this stuff, but we got pretty good at it too. We did 90-something races one year.
Wow. You've done everything and you're still running. You did course measurement.
Oh, yeah. I've got a story about that too. In 96, we had a race up in Nederland, which is west up in the mountains. It was a Ned's what they call it, because everybody, there was the Erie, the Ned. But anyway, because of Boulder, they were playing these games. And they wanted to change the start and finish for the 10K. So I'm certifying the 10K. And it comes through town and goes into this dirt road and zigzags in there a little bit. I'm looking back to make sure there's no cars coming because I'm doing this long tangent. And it had a rock about the size of a football with my bike. I hadn't seen it. Went down, broke my collarbone. And that was the end of certifying it that day. I ended up having to take an ambulance down to the hospital. It turns out Amy drove me down. I don't remember a lot of that day because it was a painful day. But that ended up, I have a bad healed collarbone and I have issues with it still these days. But yeah, that was one of my disasters for race certifying.
What's the longest period you took off where you didn't run a race?
I don't think I had a period of not racing. I had a period of not racing marathons.
All right.
I was going to run the 96 People's Race, and we started it. About the halfway turnaround, I began to feel warmer than I should be feeling. And by, I think it was about 19 miles, I think it was, I was full fluttered, the flu. I was sick. And so I dropped out. And that would have broken that. I had like a 14-year no marathon period, and that would have broken that a bit. But That was my one attempt at it. The plantar fascia tear is ended my elite career, and then I ended it again with the left foot. I tore that. I was running a half marathon in New Mexico, the Duke City half marathon. Pablo Vigil and I were racing each other, and we were trying both of us win the Masters. There's a little bit of prize money for Masters. And around 10 miles, I tore the other plantar fascia. And I ended up still second, but mostly walking. And I decided, okay, my body isn't taking this anymore. So I quit running longer races. I ran a lot of little 5Ks, and I dropped down to where I was running maybe 25, maybe 30 miles in a week. And I put on a lot of weight. I was sort of done with it. Then 2003, I got diagnosed with prostate cancer. And it was a PSA test. So it was enough in that I had a reasonable chance of doing something about it. And I was scared. It was really scary to hear the word cancer. We talked about it and decided we need to make some life changes. And one of the things, and I don't push this on people, but one of the things that is associated with men's prostate cancer is American red meat, because hormones we put in our feed animals. So I haven't had red meat since 2003. And I lost weight. I was about 170 to 175. And I'm heavier than I want to be now. I'm in the 160s. Part of that's due to the chemo I'm on now is causing fluctuations in my weight. I'll be 158 to 163. That's my range. But right now I'm in the 160s. But anyway, I got my prostate out and we started running races again. And I've been running 5Ks here and there and occasional track meets I was running, but I wasn't running very fast. I was maybe 18 to 20 minutes, actually maybe even 22 minutes for 5K. And I got down in my 50s, I got down to mid 17s for 5K. And I almost got sub 3 as a 50-year-old, but I fell down tripping over a curve, and I think it was 3 hours and 50 seconds or something. And this was near the finish, and I struggled in.
Yeah. We all have the genetics we're born with, and some of that helps in racing and everything else. And with your health challenges, I know you've talked about maybe some of this was environmental.
I think a lot of it, the prostate cancer is hereditary. My father's had it, and I have had several other relatives that had it. But the colon cancer, which I had in 16, and the lung cancer I've had off and on. 21 was the first time I was diagnosed with lung cancer. My sister's had the same thing. She's 3 years younger than me, and she's had the same cancers at the same time. We lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we were pretty young. And there were burn barrels. We lived near a junkyard where they were throwing away all kinds of nasty stuff. We were under the flight path of the airplanes, flew for the Air Force. And if you look up Lake Charles, there's all kinds of petroleum-related cancers and often cancer. So I think we got exposed to something environmental. The fact that there's nobody else in our family history that really has had these two cancers makes me think it's environmentally related. Does it mean anything? Not really. But you always wonder, what did I do? How did this happen? Is it my fault? You always have those thoughts. Yeah. And I've come to, I don't think it was my fault. I think it's just the luck of the draw. But when this happens, you do think, okay, what should I have done differently? How could I have avoided this? And I don't know.
Yeah.
And we also, back then they were spraying for DDT for mosquitoes. And we actually ran behind the spray trucks. We thought it was cool. 10 years old, I'm stupid.
I want to talk about a couple other stories you've written. People can look at runningbears.com and find a few of the neat essays. They'll find out exactly what.
There's some of my stories there, yeah.
But I want to ask you to talk about a little bit about the PO2 unit, which I don't think people are familiar with today. People know about VO2 max and they've seen some of these contraptions, but you have some great stories with that.
That one, it came out early 80s, and it was to simulate altitude training for sea-level runners. You wore this gizmo. It was like breathing through a long pipe. It was like breathing through a 30-foot pipe. So you don't quite get the air from the other end. You're breathing in and out of that, so you don't have the pressure, but it's building up carbon dioxide. And so you have to wear these filters, these soda lime containers to breathe through to absorb some of that carbon dioxide. So you got that going for you. And that produces heat, and it gets up to 120 degrees in the chemical reaction to absorb that carbon dioxide. The way you get the altitude part is you wear this mask that's got a little hole in it, and that allows in a certain amount of air. And they calculated how much there are two of them you could wear. You could wear one for 5,000 and something feet and one for 8,000 and something feet. And it was primarily focused for elite athletes. I got a free one through a physiologist I knew who wanted to do some testing. And so he got it for me, and I proceeded to run it. It was like 81. I remember now when it happened. And it did produce faster short races for me. I don't know that it helped my marathon, but it did produce faster short races. But I've got a beard. So the mask was supposed to be it's typical. Like it wouldn't work with my beard. It'd leak around it. I tried denture cream and stuff to try to seal it, and I couldn't seal it. So I ended up having it adapted where I had a mouthpiece. And then I'd have
like a snorkel
mouthpiece, but it did the same thing. They made an adaptation for me. And then I had a nose clip, so I wouldn't breathe through my nose. And Nike at the time, because I was doing this heat training stuff all the time, I'd been doing that since 77. Maybe a silver running suit.
Hey, this is like a space blanket.
But I don't think they were thinking of those terms. They were just thinking of more heat. But anyway, so they made that. And so I'm running along. I've got on a hat to hold the mask on and everything. So I've got the hat on and I've got this thing to hold everything together. And I've got the PO2 tanks on. It is an 80 plus day, maybe even 90 degrees. And I'm getting a lot of heat from the tanks. The tanks weighed about 30 plus pounds. I've got on 3 sets of sweats and 3 rain suits sandwiched between each other. I'm hot. And I'm now probably carrying at least 45 extra pounds because all the sweat weight. And I'm doing a 6-mile run. And I'm doing probably 7-minute pace for a 6-mile run back when I could actually do that and be easy. And I'm about a mile, maybe even a half mile from home. And this lady driving down the road drives into the ditch. And I don't know what's going on with her. And I think I should help her, but I'm hot and I'm uncomfortable.
You think she drove in the ditch at the sight of you?
I don't think that. So I get on home. I've stripped down. I'm sitting on the steps of the house, dripping in just my shorts. And the phone rings. And this is back when you got to go in the house to answer the phone. As I go in, and it's the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And they say, were you out running in something strange a few minutes ago? I said, maybe. Why? So we got a report of a space alien running in your neighborhood. We thought of you. And that's how much notoriety I had in the community. I could see how they might think what I looked like was a space alien. Anyway, that was one of my strange experiences in running.
We've got a lot of them. And the circling the globe virtual run.
It didn't start first for the circular thing. It started initially with when COVID came along, races went away for a while. And that's why we retired from timing, because it just didn't happen. And most of our running timing was high school meets, but we didn't know, because we used foot chips. We didn't know what we were going to have to do with the chips, whether we had to soak them in chlorine. Nobody knew anything. So we decided, okay, we'll sell our equipment. In 2020, I was getting close to the time I wanted to retire anyway, carrying all that. So virtual events began happening. I ran a virtual mile downhill in 540, but I did it, even though it was downhill. But Laz decided to put on the great race across Tennessee.
This is Lazarus Lake, Gary Cantrell, Barkley.
Yeah.
And Big Backyard founder. Yeah.
Yeah. He had this map of the course you ran, and wherever you stopped for the day, there were pictures of wherever you were. So Amy signed us up for that. We ran across Tennessee, and we turned around and ran back across Tennessee that first year. And then we did it the next year. And then I think 2 years later, maybe 3, I don't remember exactly. My timing of all this stuff is vague, but they came up with the idea of the great circumpolar race around the world, CRAW. And they came up with this. We started and went all the way around the world along this trail they had and came across the Bering Strait. It was a team thing. You didn't try to do it by yourself. And so we found 10 people. And we reported our mileage every day, and we did it. And we've got these 2 huge maps that shows our path. And it was a thing to keep you running. For a period, we were doing 100 miles a week between running and walking.
Yeah. One last thing I want to check. you got the Boulder in the mid 80s, and Boulder in the late 70s was a big hub of people
Actually,
going out there.
it started a little bit with Shorter and Vassar and Galloway, but they went
Yeah.
up to Vail. But then Galloway and Vassar went back east, and Frank stayed out here. In the late 70s, he began making Boulder a little bit more of a mecca. But it's a road racing mecca more than a track mecca.
Yeah. And Rich Castro was out there coaching.
He's still learning. He's still doing some of that.
Were you running with the crowd that late 70s when everybody get together for Sunday runs and big dinners and working as bouncers, the college age kids?
I did a little bit early on in my running career, but I found that doing a long run the day after a race wasn't the best idea for me. And so I would get with them after they finished and have breakfast sometimes. But also, I'm a little bit of an introvert. And though I was friendly with a lot of these guys, I like to kind of run by myself. Most of the time, when I ran with other people, it'd be too fast. And I learned that unless it was a speed session, I was better running by myself. Now, sometimes I ran really well because I ran with somebody else. Dick Berkeley and I trained together from late 79 to the trials. And he made the team in the 5,000. I made it at the marathon. I drug him through the long runs and he drug me through the speed. And boy, was he dragging me in that speed. It was awfully fast. But I didn't train that often with anybody. I had, I want to say, 4 training buddies over the years that I really liked. And they were willing to run at a pace that was rational for both of us as opposed to pushing the whole way. I have stories about those that I could tell, but in general, it was just, I learned the hard way. You don't want to do that in training. Those are things you say for races.
Yeah. So to sum up, you were a high school kid, walk on, you made the Olympic team that didn't go, world championship, timing. You're still running and tracking this enormous mileage in your walks and runs. And you've even got a podcast. How did that get started? It's you, Tab, and Boston Billy. What do you guys hope to do with
I don't
that?
know if we have a hope. Billy wants to get the nation running. He thinks, and it is running, but he thinks it's one of the best things in the world. Ron wants to get all the high school kids to be aware. He also wasn't that well known in high school. He did better in college than I did. We're trying to point out that just because you didn't have world beating high school times doesn't mean you won't be capable of developing. In 1980, I was 29 when I made the Olympic team. And I didn't really start showing up to be a factor till I was 25. And I was decent in high school and I was 6th, I think, at the state meet, but in my best high school performance, but that's not something to be that excited about. I still have the school record for the mile because they don't run the mile anymore. They run the 1600. So that was Ron's goal. My goal, I'm trying to get some of the history of the sport because we're mostly talking to people, not recent people. We're talking about people that from the 70s and 80s. And I have friends that don't know the names. Billy Mills is unknown to some of these people, which I think is a shame. And he's one of the great American heroes.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It's great to hear you guys kind of the things that come up when you guys just muse together and introduce people that you've known over the years. How many people have you invited that you didn't know before you got them on your show?
Bobby Gibb.
Ah, okay.
We knew her. We knew her.
Yeah.
We never met. She's the only one I really had never met. I met and actually ran with almost everybody else on the list. Never ran with Ruth Jaisaki, but I knew her and we'd met many times. But everybody else I've run with, actually Joan Hansen, she was another one I hadn't met. And Claudette Grundahl I hadn't met, but I knew of them and we had awareness of each other.
All these people through the 70s, 80s and on, is there anybody you didn't beat that was on the checklist that you never got?
Craig Virgin was one I never beat. And the 80 boycott hurt him probably as much as any distance runners.
Yeah.
Because he would have been a factor in the 10,000. And he was actually preparing to run the 10,000 marathon double. That's not something a lot of people know about, but that was his objective. He was going to try that double. And I might not have made the team if we hadn't had a boycott because he would have run Bjorklund, although I was beating Gary semi-frequently at that point. Billy would have run probably, although Billy's dominance was beginning to diminish. Who knows? But anyway, yeah.
But you beat Bill Rogers more than once.
Oh, yeah, and I beat Bjorklund more than once.
Yeah.
But my point is that the marathon would have changed. But Craig, I never beat. He was one I raced frequently, but never beat. In his prime, he was one of the best in the world. You don't get to be world cross champion and not be the best in the world.
Yeah. I'll cut this out. I haven't talked to him in a while. Mark Muggleton beat Craig in an indoor 2-mile once.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah.
Any given day, it's possible.
Yeah.
But Craig was not racing the roads as much as I was. So my opportunities against him were limited. I hardly ever raced him in the roads. And that was the place I could have likely have beaten him.
Yeah.
I couldn't have beaten him on the track. I didn't focus on the track. I didn't train for the track, and it had been difficult for me to beat him there. I had good speed, but I just never trained for it.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything we could go on forever?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about. I don't know how much it would be interesting to anybody else. I'll stand up and show you my sweatshirt that I wore.
All right. Marathon Maniacs. And who did that logo?
There's a group of people called the Marathon Maniacs, and you have to run a certain number of marathons to become a marathon maniac. And there are various levels. The year we did 19, we got up to pretty much the top level. And it's basically just people. We got up to 7 stars. There are 10 stars available, and we got up to 7 stars. And then we quit running that many. But yeah, it's a group of people that they're crazy about marathons.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for everything you've done in running inspiration to people and the documentation. And I know how thankless podcasting work and editing and technical work. You're doing that too, and providing us with a lot of entertainment.
Yep. And I enjoy it. I'm not, like I said, I'm a bit of an introvert, but I like small interactions. And the fact that this allows me to interact with other people without me being in my own comfort zone, it makes me happy.
I think hearing your stories and kind of the good news of where you are in health right now will make a lot of people happy.
So,
yes, you were talking about some of your
my first exposure to racing was when Peter Snell set world record in the mile. And they reported it in the Weekly Reader, which elementary school kids were getting. And I didn't know what a mile was. It turned out it was about a mile from my elementary school back home. So I walked back home to get a feel for it. And that was my first, I guess, running hero. And then many years later, I mentioned this to somebody, and it somehow got back to Weekly Reader. So they did an article about me getting inspired by Peter Snell through Weekly Reader. So I was in Weekly Reader years later because I got inspired by Weekly Reader. Cool.
That's very cool. And you got to meet Peter Snell at his lab.
Oh, yeah. They had a lab they had a coaching symposium, brought in a bunch of athletes and coaches, and I took both categories. And so anyway, we're at the lab and we're doing all this talk about training, et cetera. He's kind of leading it because he's an excellent runner as well as exercise physiologist. And it turned out they had this huge treadmill. I would say it would be good 10 meters long and maybe 8 meters wide. And they did lunch runs on it where they get together and all run together on this treadmill. It turned out the reason they had this huge treadmill is so they could do testing of cross-country skiers, because they have the skate ski where they're going back and forth and they need this room to keep the motion going. But yeah, it was an incredibly large treadmill. It was like a whole room treadmill.
But yeah, Peter Snell, was he the guy pretty much said linear stuff scientifically comes out as, in his analysis, the ideal?
It pretty much is, although it works best for people that did what he did, which was basically train for about 3 months of racing, maybe 6 weeks. And it's still, the basics are there. You need a bit of base work, you need a bit of threshold work, and you need a bit of speed work. If you're a road racer like I was, you need to do that a little bit all year long. When you're these guys, especially coming from New Zealand, they would come over the European circuit, and that would be a short period of maybe 6 weeks. And then they'd have 8 to 9 months of just base work with some threshold thrown in.
Not having peak. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they would peak for that 6 weeks period and hardly train at all during that racing period because they're racing every 2 or 3 days. It works out very, as far as you do the testing, and the principles are still basically that. There's a lot more refinement. Nutritional ideas have changed. The shoes have made a big difference. The carbon shoes and the foam with the carbon shoes have made it a lot easier to recover from your runs. Although it does make people faster in the races, it makes them able to train harder too, which is very important. There are a lot of reasons why everybody's faster now and train somewhat differently, but the basic principles are still there. You need a little bit of all of it.
There's one other topic I want to get to, and it's an oddball, but several people are asking me about it. With the current situation, we've had a lot of drug suspensions. There's some compassion for the athletes who are looking for a way to change their lives out of some of these African village kids that are looking at an opportunity, but it's still against the rules. And the questions that have come up of saying, back when you started, when things weren't illegal, if somebody had come to you and said, this is not illegal, do you want it? Would have been your thinking then?
It was illegal. It just wasn't being caught. It was illegal to do these things and you weren't supposed to do it. And I never really had to deal with that because I wasn't aware that distance runners were doing it, even though they were, it turns out. But I knew the weight guys were doing it because I knew weight guys that admitted to me they were doing it. And I thought maybe some of those other field events, jumps, etc., not the high jump, but the long jump and triple jump might be doing it. And probably the sprinters. But again, it wasn't big on my radar. So after I got hurt, my performances began to diminish and we'd moved to Boulder. Some guy came up to me. This was the first time I'd ever had this encounter. Came up to me at a party and we wandered away from everybody else. And we were talking privately. He said, look, your performances are diminishing. And we can give you growth hormone and a light steroid mix, and we can have you back in 3 to 6 months, back to where you were. And I said, I need to go over here and get something to eat. I never spoke to him again. It's just, they talk about how it's good financially for the Africans, and it is. They can make more in a race than their combined family could make in a lifetime. But their physical health issues, and they're not good. People have died because of this stuff. The EPO, erythropoietin, is a dangerous drug. A friend of mine was a perfusionist. He's the guy that collects blood during long surgeries so they can recycle it back into the body because you can only have so much transfused from prior. And he would have people do EPO before these surgeries because they knew they were going to be doing them so they could increase the red blood count and they would have a lot and they'd be ready. And after about 1.5 to 2 years of doing this, he had so many complications, he quit doing it. A number of cancer patients in fact, during some of my lung cancer treatments, my hematocrit and hemoglobin got pretty low. And in the old days, they would have suggested EPO to bring that up. And now you've got to be pretty bad off because it's just medically not safe. We were at a race we were timing, and a guy rides up during the race. I'm standing around waiting for people to come back. He rides up and he's got this shirt on with corpuscles all over it. And I said, well, that's kind of in your face, isn't it? He says, yeah, but it's our team singlet. I work for Amgen, which is the company that makes EPO. And they have a plant here in Colorado. And he was about 20 miles from the plant, just out on a ride and stopped to see what was going on. He said, I'd never take this stuff. It's dangerous as hell. He says, what people don't know about is 10% of the people or more that use it become transfusion dependent. They quit producing. But EPO is a natural hormone. And when you take a synthetic hormone, your body quits making the natural hormone. Sometimes when you quit the synthetic, it'll come back. But for 10% or more of the population, it doesn't. And so for the rest of their lives, they either have to take EPO or have transfusions. And at the time, he told me he knew of 3 Spanish distance runners that was the case they were in. Plus, initially when they used EPO, which is a big drug now, A number of Dutch cyclists died from it because the red blood count got too high. And so the blood was too thick and their heart rate got too low and they just died. I had a friend who was a good agent from Japan. He flew into Europe one summer from Japan. So his clock is all messed up. His biological rhythm's all messed up. So he got up at like 3 a.m. He's walking the halls. He hears all these alarms going on. And all of a sudden these doors open up and Ethiopian runners are running up and down the hall. The next morning he says, what was that all about? And they said, they're having to get up when their heart rate reaches a certain point and move so they don't die. And yes, you do perform better. And yes, they've gotten better at figuring out, they use plasma now, et cetera, to kind of reduce that too viscous blood, but it's risky. And with my health issues, that's insane.
Off the table. Yeah. Is your friend?
This was a Japanese runner. Brian W. was my friend. Yeah, Brian was East Coast. He's a good runner. And then he moved to the triathlon for a while. And then he was in the medical. And he actually died of a MRSA infection.
Oh, yeah.
Our neighbor has a cat that belonged to him that we were paying godparents of his cat. And when he died, he was in Minnesota. Amy flew back and got the cat. And our neighbor now is the cat mom.
Wow. Still there. That's great. Yeah. I did a lot of 33 decades of work on HIV research. A lot of when I was in Egypt for a long time, and I stayed connected to University of Texas, Houston. I was talking to Ron about his old running tracks. I used to go to Houston a lot at medical school there. And that's where Tab did a lot of his training groups.
Yeah, he was in that area a lot early on.
The one guy I thought who said, I know where the bodies are buried type, everybody knows inside stuff, but Castro.
Castro knows quite a bit of it. John Gregorio, who worked for Nike, knows a lot of it. A lot of what we know, we can't really talk about because we don't have any physical evidence. Yeah. We know stories. We got people that are litigious, and Americans are not clean in this. There's certainly a lot of Americans. You look at Lance Armstrong, and for the longest time, because of his cancer history, I had trouble believing he would do it. But he did. Because when he had his cancer history, I had my prostate cancer. I just couldn't believe somebody would voluntarily put themselves in a situation where it would risk their health. And a lot of them, I guess, they figure they're immortal. They won't risk their health.
Yeah, I got to the Sydney Games in 2000, and I managed to get a press pass with the writing I was doing in Egypt. And I went over to watch Marion Jones jump in the trials and went to her press conferences, and she was so passionate about, oh, my husband doing this stuff, he's out. I would never
but she was. Flojo is my opinion, our best example of Americans. I flew home with her on the plane from Helsinki, and she was a different woman a year later.
Yeah.
And she put on so much muscle mass. In early 1980, I started doing Nautilus, and I ran into a guy at the club I was doing the Nautilus. He says, you're not doing it right. We need to really ramp it up. And it was where they were yelling in your ears. You're trying to push the weight up. And I was really pushing. I gained 5 pounds. I got to believe I had more natural testosterone than Flojo. And she gained like 20 pounds of muscle. Now that doesn't compute. I think that Nautilus helped me a lot. I've done weight training pretty much from that point on. That was part of, I think, why I ran 3 minutes faster. But I just still, she was a lot meeker and a lot smaller.
And it cost her a couple decades, of life.
Yeah, at least she said she was going to become a marathoner.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because somebody told her about EPO. I'm pretty sure this is what happened. I don't know that's why she thought she was going to become a marathoner. But she made these noises about how easy it was going to be. She'd set world records. One, drugs she was taking already had fogged her brain. And EPO is fine. It'll make you, and sprinters actually take it because they can train better with it. But it's not going to make you a distance runner. The Natrite Track Club, because Chuck DeGoose has always been suspicious. And I got a shipment of, when I was running for AW, of Nature vitamins. And at this point, I knew about the rumors, and I threw the Nature vitamins away because I didn't know. One, wasn't taking a lot of vitamins, but two, I just didn't know. So I just threw them all away. It's a sad thing. It makes it difficult. You see a performance and you have to wonder, was it a good performance or not?
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
add shoes.
And adding the shoes now makes it really difficult to know what to think, because you got
Legal, but it seems so fast.
as Amy says, it's legal to have fast shoes, which is fine because our shoes are a lot better than the people that came before us. But you can't factor in anymore to say, okay, this is why they ran fast. You say maybe it's the shoes, maybe it's drugs, maybe the course was off, nutrition's different.
It's really difficult.
Compare things.
Yeah. Yeah. Nick Simmons did a video when the first Vaporflies came out. He did a 4-minute downhill mile in the Vaporflies, just making a video to make.
Yes, yeah, he did a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he did.
He actually run sub 4 downhill.
Yeah.
Never run sub 4. Anyway,
Yeah.
I should have been able to run it legitimately. I had 49-second 400 speed. And so I had the speed, but I never learned how to tolerate the lactate needed to be a good miler because I never trained right. But anyway, we run the Hood to Coast in my 50s, and I was the lead leg for our team. It's a 50-year-old, 50s plus team. So we're coming off, this was Mount Hood, and they have the waves for various types of teams. And this was a master's wave. And I didn't go over 4-minute pace until 4 miles. That's how downhill it was. I was 19. Actually, I was 18 high at 4 miles. And then I suffered the rest of the relay. My legs were just trashed. I was 347 at the mile, and it was just brutal. I did a sub 4 in high school, but they did is they put this handlebar thing on the back of a truck. I ran like 355 hanging onto this thing. Essentially, I was bounding in the air, trying to stay in the air as much as possible and not
Water skiing on pavement.
basically, yeah. And they thought somehow this was going to make us faster because we'd get used to that speed. All it did is scare the crap out of us.
Yeah, swimmers do some of that.
Well,
with
yeah,
the pole rope, right?
yeah. There, you're getting the feel of the water on you, and you're getting to learn what it's that feel. But what we were doing, there was no feel for the running. It was just trying not to get killed.
That's great. And in the coaching, how did your being an elite athlete kind of inform you approaching the psychology of the athletes you coached?
It helped me understand, from my own perspective, the challenges. Because before you start a race, you've got the fear of failure and how to deal with that. You also have the fear of, okay, I've missed a day or I've missed a workout, and how to deal with that, as well as the fact that I also learned that, yeah, racing is important, but it's not life and death. Some of these people, even though they're not elite, it seems like it's life and death. And so I had to be able to deal with those kinds of issues, as well as I had to be able to recognize that you can't overtrain and assume you're going to be successful. Some people get away with it, but they can only get away with it for a year or two. The body will go into an alarm state where if you're overtraining or doing eating disorders, and your body can do things. And I think it's about a year and a half that you can get away with it. And then the body's eaten up so much of itself that you can't get away with it anymore. I had to be able to recognize that was going on in people. And I actually walked away from a couple of athletes that I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't help them and they couldn't be helped. And I didn't want to be there when the crash came. And you couldn't convince them they needed to go and get help psychologically. But part of the problem is I also overdid it. I was coaching 30 people at the time via phone, and I couldn't keep track of, I had notes. You have to be able to think about who you're coaching. It's not, you can't just do it from notes. You've got to have it sort of,
Just a paper.
yeah, you can have an idea who they are. I was losing that at the end when I backed away from it a bit. I'll meet somebody every now and then. They talk about how I was so influential in their running as their coach, and I don't remember them. But part of that is also, I don't remember people as well as I should. Amy's really good about remembering things. And I think part of that is, as a woman, you have to keep track of menstrual cycles and things like that. And so you become very good at time. I'm not really good at time. I don't know where I am in the world temporally. I have to ask her every now and then, was that 21 or was that 22? I can't remember. And it's not because I don't want to remember. It's just, I don't. It's just time as well as from the years of being a marathoner, I've become very present. In a marathon, you have to be at the moment. You can't think about what's just happened. You can't think a lot about what's going to happen. You have to be where you are and paying attention to where you are. And as well as when you're training, it's the same thing. You can't think about the workouts you've done. You can't think about the workout that's coming. If you're in your third 800, you think about the third 800. You don't think about the sixth 800. Because if you think about the sixth 800, you're going to mess up the third 800. And so I've been doing this for over 60 years. And so you become very present minded. And that makes it difficult sometimes to remember things outside the present.
All right, maybe we'll leave it there. It's such a pleasure to spend time. Thank you for all your time, Benji. It's great. I know people will be thrilled here. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Bye.
Bye. Hey, I hope you enjoyed another episode. Do you have someone you'd like to hear interviewed on the podcast? You can leave a comment on the YouTube channel or on the website, running70s.com. That's running70s.com. Let me know what you think of the episodes and anyone, including yourself, you'd like to hear interviewed. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.